Unauthorized citizens must stay indoors.
Tensions rise as we enter the 213th week of lockdown.
A grim new reality emerges.
COVID-23 has mutated.
Beginning thermal scan. Thermal scan normal.
A horrifying new development
New
today.
data confirms the virus attacks the brain tissue.
A recent study out of Imperial University in London shows the virus could come with some cognitive costs, possibly aging the brain by 10 years.
It's one of the most common early symptoms of COVID-19.
This feeling of being foggy or a little confused.
Dr. Clifton Gooch with Tampa General Hospital and USF says more and more patients are reporting the same difficulties. That's why cognitive issues are now at the forefront of studies into the virus.
We've identified a group of patients that have come to be known as the long haulers. So these are individuals that get COVID, they get over the acute infection, but then they have symptoms that persist for long periods of time.
20 to 40% of COVID-19 patients are long haulers that carry a new disease they never had. So far, doctors know the virus can affect their lungs, heart, kidneys, and brain.
The World Health Organization is now urging people to be aware of the coronavirus entering through food chains through frozen food.
Frozen chicken, of course, frozen chicken wings imported from Brazil were discovered with the virus, and that was yesterday. That came a day after it was found on the packaging of shrimp imported from Ecuador.
Tonight, thousands in miles-long lines waiting hours on New Year's Eve in Tennessee to get the COVID-19 vaccine. The long-awaited vaccine's finally here. But states are now struggling to get those life-saving shots into arms.
They don't have the people, they don't have the funding, and there isn't an overarching plan that we really need to ensure that we get this done quickly.
In Arizona, out of the more than 300,000 vaccines the state has received, only 18% have been used. Vaccination sites in Florida overwhelmed. Calls for the National Guard to come in and help. Some people say they can't get an appointment.
I have called more than 200 times. Nothing.
Operation Warp Speed now crawling. Only 2.7 million vaccinations recorded, far short of the initial goal of 20 million by the end of the year.
There really has to be a lot more effort in the sense of resources for the locals, namely the states, the cities, the counties.
Some healthcare workers refusing to take the vaccine.
Well, what I'm worried about is people who aren't taking it, frankly.
Ohio, Kansas, Mississippi, and Georgia have the lowest vaccination rates in the country.
In many parts of rural Georgia, both in the north and the south, there's vaccine available and literally sitting in freezers.
In West Virginia, more than 40 people accidentally given an antibody treatment instead of the vaccine. And tonight in Wisconsin, a fire pharmacist arrested after police say he admitted to intentionally removing 570 vaccine doses from the freezer, then putting them back in hours later. But it was too late for 57 people who already got those doses, now possibly ineffective.
This was a situation involving a bad actor as opposed to a bad process.
In 2015, you gave more than $50 million to CureVac, which is really focused on this messenger RNA technology. How is that so different? And why did you see it back then, 5 years ago, that it could be such a transformative technology?
These mRNA vaccines will be among the vaccines that help end the pandemic. We've been investing in them for quite some time because they will eventually be very cheap, and you can have a factory that even once you want a new disease, you only have to change a tiny little bit of that factory to have it make a vaccine.
Tonight, experts bracing for the spread of that highly contagious variant of COVID.
You're going to be hearing about reports from other states and more cases in the states that have already reported.
Some labs across the country now screening for the variant. Cases confirmed in Colorado and California as the country hits grim records in deaths and hospitalizations. LA County tweeting the profiles of victims. The tweets posted once every 10 minutes to mirror how often the virus claims lives here. Funeral homes now being forced to turn families away.
I have to say, I'm sorry, I can't help you right now. And that's a very difficult thing to tell people.
Across the U.S., hospitals scrambling. In Alabama, doctors warning of shortages.
If you have a heart attack and you come to the hospital, we now have no place to put you because all the ICU beds are occupied. And it's not just here. Any place that we would transfer you, they also are full.
Even Surgeon General Jerome Adams, unable to visit his wife who's battling cancer in the hospital because of COVID restrictions, tweeting, "I'm hoping she doesn't have to spend New Year's in a hallway because the beds are full." And tonight, a new study reporting over 2 million children have had COVID, more than 1 million just since November. In Texas, 11-year-old Kaysen Abbott now battling that rare multisystem inflammatory syndrome in children linked to the virus.
Just days after the UK identified a highly contagious new strain of the coronavirus, it is now popping up around the globe. France, Denmark, Spain, Sweden, the Netherlands, Germany, and it's not just Europe. Japan, Australia, Lebanon, and our neighbor to the north, Canada. Canadian health officials say a couple tested positive. They have no travel history, no known exposure or contacts. This UCSF epidemiologist says the UK variant could be in the U.S., and we might not know it because our surveillance to detect genetic changes in the virus lags behind other countries.
Britain has a particularly good surveillance system, so they do a lot of monitoring of all of their coronavirus tests to look for changes.
Experts say there's no evidence that the new strain is a more dangerous form of the virus, just that it's more contagious. Now Los Angeles County is testing to see if that highly contagious variant might be behind its new surge. Meanwhile, the makers of the new Pfizer COVID vaccine say they believe it will work against the new strain, but say its shot could be adjusted quickly if need be.
In principle, technically, it is possible to make a new vaccine mimicking the new strains within a few weeks.
But experts warn this may not be the last mutation. There have already been several. As more of us get vaccinated and find ways to stay safe, the virus will change to become stronger and more contagious.
South Africa, where another new variant of coronavirus is causing alarm. Scientists say initial evidence suggests it's more infectious than other versions of the virus, and doctors are reporting more young people who are seriously ill.
This new variant is highly concerning because it is yet more transmissible and it appears to have mutated further than the new variant that's been discovered in the UK.
And all of this on top of the new variant believed to have originated in the UK. Today, the government released these graphs showing its rapid growth in different parts of England. The dark lines are the new variant. The lighter lines are the pre-existing strains. And MPs were told today the UK variant believed to have emerged in Kent has probably spread further.
The fact they picked up 10 cases with sequencing of this new variant in a country as small as Denmark with a relatively low infection rate would suggest, almost certainly in my view, that this virus has been introduced into the great majority, if not all, of European countries.
One of the beauties really of this novel technology is its simplicity and in theory its adaptability, its agility to respond.
The developers of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which is being used by the NHS, believe it will still be effective, reassuring those who are relying on it as a way out of this pandemic.
As viruses multiply, they change. And the same is happening to the coronavirus.
All viruses mutate, and that is to be expected.
Scientists have been tracking those mutations while following coronavirus's journey around the world. Some of the mutations help the virus to spread, others do nothing at all. But as coronavirus multiplies and changes, could it also become more deadly?
The new coronavirus, like all other viruses, is constantly mutating as it replicates inside its human host. The virus uses us to multiply by injecting its genetic information into our cells. The cell then becomes a kind of virus factory, mass-producing the genetic material that allows more of the virus to develop. As the virus replicates, mistakes are often made. Errors mean the genetic material changes, causing a mutated version of the virus. If those changes are advantageous, the mutation will go on to spread.
Researchers from a hospital near Paris looked back at people hospitalized in December of 2019 and early January 2020, looking for patients with symptoms and CAT scan findings that were consistent with COVID-19. Remember, back then, no one had any test for COVID-19 and no one thought it had gone beyond China. They identified a 42-year-old man with findings consistent with COVID-19 who was admitted on December 27th with 4 days of symptoms. The frozen samples taken at that time were retested and they were positive for SARS-CoV-2. Now, this man had no history of travel, and that suggests SARS-CoV-2 was in the Paris area at least 4 days before the first announcement of the virus in Wuhan, China on December 31st. Now, on the topic of how long SARS-CoV-2 might have been around, a new study from the UK that looked at natural mutations in the virus found the virus may have been circulating as early as October of 2019, although that time frame is based on modeling estimates and only provides a hint of when the virus entered circulation, not proof. The paper also identified nearly 200 recurrent mutations that the researchers believe are helping the virus evolve and adapt to infecting humans.
Yeah, now finally, I want to mention a third study that has been widely reported but has not been peer-reviewed and is very preliminary. The paper actually suggests that mutations in the spike protein, which is critical for the virus to invade human cells, might be making it more infectious and might cause difficulty creating a vaccine.
The paper also identified nearly 200 recurrent mutations that the researchers believe are helping the virus evolve.
Scientists have been expecting the virus that causes COVID-19 to mutate, and there is now new research that suggests one of the dominant strains, the strains found here in Canada, is in fact mutating and is in fact now more infectious.
Scientists have discovered hundreds of mutations to the virus that causes COVID-19. Researchers in the UK found almost 200 recurrent genetic mutations, which could mean a more contagious strain of the novel coronavirus.
We need to make sure that our army is ready to go to war. And we're going to make sure that our soldiers are ready. We have an obligation to do that, so they will continue to train.
We're testing first-time testers, so we're capturing people that are not in their data sets.
And that's because they trust coming to a place like this.
And that's what we believe.
She says as they test more members of the African American community, a mysterious trend is emerging. The black community has a much lower rate of infection.
We've tested close to 900 people at this point, and we've had 5 positives. 5.
The problem is, for black people who do contract the disease, the death rate is much higher than usual. Dr. Rhodes says that may be physiological or the result of inferior health care options. She's not sure. It hasn't been studied.
Further complicating the issue, according to Governor Andrew Cuomo, is a new request. This one from the federal government for a data sharing agreement before the receipt of any vaccines.
They want the name, they want the address, they want the date of birth, they want the ethnicity, they want the race, they want the sex, and then they want the ID number.
The governor says the ID numbers refer to passport, driver's license, and social security numbers. He also adds the agreement states the information would be used by the CDC, HHS, and other federal partners.
Emergency with more than 45 million cases worldwide. The U.S. is on the verge of surpassing 9 million, with cases up in 48 states.
Here in Wisconsin and across much of the country, the numbers are all going in the wrong direction, and much concern right now is that there seems to be no peak in sight. This morning, an unsettling new record for the United States, 88,500 new coronavirus cases in one day.
Juliet, the victim's family doesn't buy that drugs were involved. They think a new chemical that was used to spray down the school and eliminate COVID virus actually caused the death. The last time Tamara Covington White saw her son, he was laying lifeless on the grass. Dublin police had just pulled the body out from the library. That was Wednesday morning. She's back at that same spot this afternoon with flowers and balloons to remember him. Dublin police smelled the strong chemical in the library. By the time the hazmat team arrived, the odor had dissipated. Police say they found the powerful drug fentanyl near the 2 janitors. They're waiting for the autopsy and toxicology reports to find out what killed the 32-year-old man.
I've been working in police work for about 22 years, and this is the first type of incident that I've seen that's even similar to this.
I'm really worried that 5 years after this pandemic, people are going to be like, well, that's over. We're probably not going to have one for another 100 years. This is not a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing. I think it's really important for us to understand that these sorts of diseases, zoonoses, as we'll call them, or things that come from animals and can be transmitted to humans, are actually increasing in prevalence as we have climate change and as more and more humans populate the earth and move into these parts of the planet that we didn't live in before. That's where you can get some viruses or diseases to jump from animals into humans and then cause more disease. It's not like every single time you hang out in a cave with some bats, you're going to pick up a new disease, but certainly some of these are going to turn into more illnesses.
Tests have shown that patients were infected with a novel coronavirus. These viruses are very common in animals. They live and spread in pigs, domestic and wild birds, dogs, cats, and camels. For some reasons that we don't yet understand, the virus mutates and makes the leap from animals into humans. Only 7 coronaviruses, including this new one, have made the jump into humans. The majority cause a common cold-type illness, but 2 viruses, severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, and Middle East respiratory syndrome, or MERS, have been much more deadly. Coronaviruses spread through droplets when a person coughs or sneezes. They can also spread when a person touches something, such as a door handle, which is contaminated with droplets, and then touches their mouth, nose, or eyes. If a super spreader catches the disease, they can spread it to a disproportionately large number of people. Once it's in the wider population, health workers are most at risk because its symptoms are like that of any other respiratory illness, such as pneumonia. Sufferers will have a cough, a runny nose, a headache, a fever, a sore throat, and a feeling of being generally unwell. Scientists don't yet know why coronaviruses mutate. There are still no treatments or vaccines for them. In a world where people are more mobile and connected than ever, we cannot rule out the possibility of further spread. The fear is that if the virus mutates, it could suddenly race around the world, infecting thousands.
A new strain of COVID-19 caused multiple countries to ban travel from the UK, grounding planes and leaving trucks headed into France backed up for miles.
This should, not make us panic.
Dr. James Cottrell is an infectious disease expert at UT Southwestern and believes it's too early to call this new strain more contagious.
So we really have seen this since the very beginning with SARS-CoV-2.
Mutations aren't new. This animation from Next Strain shows when different strains were discovered. There are a lot of variations, most are meaningless. This one is noteworthy because it has 17 mutations and quickly became the dominant one in the UK.
So we don't have enough information right now to separate, is this something new about the virus that makes it more easily spread, or is this just by chance?
It could have just been present at a super spreader event.
We know that it almost certainly does not increase virulence. It isn't a more deadly virus, number one. And number two, it's extremely unlikely that it's going to interfere with the efficacy of a vaccine.
It's possible, though, the strain could lower the benefit of convalescent plasma and monoclonal antibodies, but Cottrell says they'll have to experiment. This isn't the first mutation, and it won't be the last.
Really, 50 Americans lost every 30 minutes or so. It's being called a mass fatality program. A morgue truck behind this hospital in Whittier. They have put 60 more of these trucks on standby. And some ICU nurses have now been told they are in, quote, disaster mode.
On a daily basis, San Francisco firefighters are seeing an increase of COVID-19 response calls, according to their union.
60 members that are positive with COVID, 29 in quarantine, and 1 right now in the hospital.
Maybe another 3-4 months, probably we will lose everything that we worked hard for.
The Indian restaurant Costa Gonzalez manages across the street from Disneyland will likely be part of a new and troubling wave of closures that won't survive the governor's new guidelines that prevent Disneyland from reopening until likely next summer.
Beginning Tuesday, passengers headed to New York from the UK will have to have a negative COVID test before they can board. British Airways, Delta, and Virgin Atlantic all agreed to do the testing after New York's governor said he's worried the new mutant strain of the coronavirus could spread. Should California do the same? Passengers weren't all on the same page.
I don't necessarily think we should be testing everyone constantly.
Pump the brakes. Let's take a broad look at it.
I think that's a good thing. I think it's a lot to ask, but I think that for everyone's safety, it's necessary now that we have a new strain.
Experts say the new strain is as much as 70 times more contagious than COVID-19. It's spreading out of control in parts of that country, even as it is on lockdown. Countries around the world are rushing to put a travel ban on passengers coming from the UK. But in the thousands of tests California does daily, Governor Newsom says the new variation hasn't shown up.
There's no evidence of this strain yet into the state of California.
The new mutated COVID virus seems to bind a little tighter, a little more easily, and enter the cell of the human body easier than our current COVID virus that we have here, primarily in California and the United States.
Experts say they believe the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines would be effective against the new strain, but admit there's a lot they don't know yet. But New York's governor says he is not taking any chances.
I believe, intuitively, it's already here. We learned this lesson the hard way, and we're not going to go through it again.
California is mostly back in lockdown mode this morning with an order affecting 30 million people there. It's the first state to lock down again. Hospitalizations in that state have tripled in the last month.
California recorded more than 30,000 new cases in a single day yesterday. That is the highest single-day total in any state so far, and many other states are seeing a troubling spike.
And here at Renown Regional Medical Center, look at what they have had to resort to. They're putting patients in their parking garage This is a COVID ward. Now, we're nowhere near the patients, but they set this up back in April, hoping to never have to use it, but they started running out of space at the main hospital, and so this is what it has come to.
To California now, where rising hospitalizations led to more regional lockdowns Sunday night by order of the governor. This affects more than 30 million people. Starting today, salons are closed, retailers are under strict capacity limits, and all dining, indoor and out, is suspended. The way it works in Los Angeles is that county officials classify video production work as essential and require regular COVID testing at TV and movie shoots. The famous Las Vegas Strip is a little less crowded in the age of coronavirus, but those we spoke to who are still coming here say they feel safe gambling their luck in Sin City.
I've seen people wiping down the, games and stuff.
It's very quiet, and I'm sure it's difficult for people here to make a living.
How hard hit has Vegas been by COVID?
We got hit hard by the pandemic. There's no other way to look at it.
That is Jonas Peterson. He is CEO of the Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance. He says the city's unemployment numbers hit Great Recession levels, but he says the hospitality industry is primed for a major comeback in 2021.
The big key to success is that the vaccine. So once that hits and now has a program delivery schedule, I think you see a confidence return.
But the vaccine is still months away for most Americans, and right now businesses across the country are facing down new restrictions. In New York State, Governor Andrew Cuomo warned that indoor dining could again stop in New York City. That's if the rate of COVID hospitalizations does not stabilize soon.
If you overwhelm the hospital capacity, you will have to go back to shut down. There are no options.
And in California, some small business owners are pleading with Governor Gavin Newsom to reopen outdoor dining and salon services.
Let us prove to you that we can do this, that we are being safe.
The world is on the brink of a great scientific achievement. A COVID-19 vaccine will likely be ready by early next year. In fact, we'll probably have more than one vaccine ready. These vaccines will allow us to save millions of lives. They'll also have another enormous benefit. They'll allow us to develop a plan for the world to globally eliminate COVID-19. To achieve this goal of global elimination, we need three things: the capacity to produce billions of vaccines, the funding to pay for them, and the systems to deliver them everywhere. That's why I'm thrilled today to announce a new joint agreement signed this morning by 16 pharmaceutical companies and the Gates Foundation. In this agreement, the companies commit to, among other things, scaling up manufacturing at an unprecedented speed and making sure that approved vaccines reach broad distribution as early as possible. The next component we need for global elimination is the funding to pay for those vaccines. And this is where the ACT Accelerator comes in. It's supported by Gavi and the Global Fund. Both organizations have spent 2 decades becoming experts in how to buy and deliver vaccines, diagnostics, and drugs to developing countries. Finally, even when we have the manufacturing capacity and funding lined up, we'll need to strengthen health systems to achieve the broad coverage to deliver the vaccine and monitor for outbreaks. In doing this, we can take the lessons we've learned from the ongoing effort to eradicate polio. With the right diagnostics, health workers can also sound the alarm if a future disease jumps from bats or birds or any animal to humans. In other words, we can also be building the system that will help reduce the damage of the next pandemic. This will be seared in the memory of this generation, hopefully enough to invest, to be more ready next time, hopefully to invest more in all these infectious diseases that are still a huge problem. But it's almost at the level of a world war, I would say, and including the need to cooperate.
Would you then say that this has been the biggest challenge of our lifetime?
Yes. Since World War II, this is the biggest global challenge that we've all faced, even bigger than the financial crises that have come along.
Billionaire Bill Gates hasn't just been outspoken about the pandemic. He's put his money where his mouth is. Just today, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation announced a new $250 million commitment, bringing their total investment to $1.75 billion to combat COVID-19.
Given your money, your access, your ability to just kind of rest on your laurels, what made you feel so passionate about being a part of this?
Well, our foundation is passionate about saving lives and getting vaccines out. You know, the number of children who die every year has been cut from 10 million a year down to 5 million a year. It's, you know, I'm really pleased the companies have stepped up. The plan is coming together to get this vaccine out. So, you know, it's a tragedy, but there's a lot of heroes.
The Microsoft co-founder and philanthropist had warned of a pandemic for years, even saying 5 years ago that the next epidemic could be a super contagious and deadly strain of the flu.
If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus.
Gates realized the magnitude of coronavirus before it was even identified as a pandemic.
It was in February, actually, Valentine's Day, when I had a dinner with the foundation experts, and I said, will this be contained to China? And they said, no way. It's just not possible. There's too many cases, there's too much travel. And that's when I realized, oh my God, this is going to be unique in my lifetime in terms of causing global problems. So that became a top priority for the foundation, to take this deep vaccine expertise we have and apply it to this disease.
Where does this fall, this vaccination for coronavirus? Do you feel like this is kind of part of that timeline?
Absolutely. I compare it to a world war where we had to change how we behave. We had to take huge economic pain in order to avert the many millions of deaths that, if we had just continued on, would have taken place.
A large portion of his donations have gone toward vaccine development and distribution to help ensure the vaccine is delivered to all corners of the planet as quickly as possible.
Well, there are many countries that have no vaccine factories at all, and it doesn't make any sense that their citizens wouldn't get any protection. After all, we want to end the disease everywhere, so we're not constantly having these reinfections. And if anyone cares about equity, they should not want the vaccines only to go to the rich people or the rich countries. And now we have these factories all over the world, including Serum Institute in India, ready to help out, and so that the wait for the developing countries isn't years.
Let's talk about the impact. If, let's say, 70% of Americans do end up getting the vaccine, but you see a much smaller percentage in China or India or Africa, what would that mean ultimately?
Well, we want to bring the amount of this virus in humans down to zero if possible, so that we're not constantly having to revaccinate or having outbreaks in different areas. Ideally, the whole globe would participate in this the same way that we work together to eradicate smallpox.
You've recently talked about how we might have as many as 6 vaccines by spring. Why is that so important, especially what AstraZeneca is working on? Because, you know, a lot has been discussed as far as like the specific temperature, for example, that Pfizer and even Moderna's current vaccines require.
Yeah, the Pfizer and Moderna are going to be a bit more expensive, harder to scale up, and more demanding on this temperature cold chain. The other vaccines that are only a few months behind will be cheaper, easier to scale up, and not as demanding. And I do think we'll have the global cooperation to fund this vaccine for all of humanity. The U.S. is not yet shown up to that.
An executive order signed by President Trump this week says that the U.S. will only share vaccine doses after there's enough for all Americans who choose to be vaccinated.
At least as we get into the Biden administration, the fact that we care about other people, I think that will reemerge as a priority because the U.S. has always been the leader in these health issues, HIV, malaria. The U.S. government and our foundation are always the two biggest funders of these infectious diseases.
There are some people who are concerned about taking the vaccine. What would you say to them to kind of allay their fears?
You know, medicines have to be tested in trials, and there are sometimes rare side effects. The net benefit of this, if you look at the data from these high-quality regulators, is very, very high. And so I hope people will be rational about that and listen. You know, if you're in a multi-generational household, if you work at a school or a nursing home or a prison, you really owe it to the people there that you're not transmitting to them.
And what are you're kind of looking in your crystal ball, and I think you've kind of put 2022 as the deadline ultimately, or hopefully the time frame in which the whole world has kind of moved beyond coronavirus.
Yeah, the progress in the rich countries will be pretty dramatic even by summer of 2021. But for the entire world, it'll probably be out sometime in 2022 before we really get the coverage levels that we need to drop the numbers to be either tiny or zero.
Gates is now hopeful that other members of the billionaire club will step up to help.
I always think we could do more. You know, we should give more, give smarter. And we have a group called the Giving Pledge that brings people together. You know, I hope in the future people are even more generous.
Even before we conquer COVID, Gates is already talking about combating the next global disease outbreak.
You say next time we'll be able to do it a lot faster. What will be the difference next time?
We'll have gigantic mRNA factories, and we'll be able to do mRNA at under $2 and no cold chain requirement.
In the midst of all of the darkness and despair, what gives you the most hope right now?
Just the way people have come together on this, you know, science, caring about other people. I'm very hopeful that the way we get out of this disaster sets a model for innovation and cooperation.
On the surface, the vaccine candidates from Moderna and Pfizer look like any other vaccine you've taken.
It really felt just like a flu shot.
Like other vaccines, they work by training your body to build up defensive weapons against the virus, like antibodies and T cells. But instead of training your body by introducing a killed virus or a fragment of a virus, these vaccines introduce a set of instructions called messenger RNA, or mRNA, enclosed in a little blob of fat.
The key concept with RNA is that RNA is messages, and they're meant as like short-term messages. So it'd be like in each cell at any given time, there are maybe 5,000 to 10,000 different messages.
Dr. Shane Crotty at the La Jolla Institute for Immunology says the mRNA instructs some of your cells to make the coronavirus's signature spike protein, the key protein that unlocks the door to cells. He says it's just enough material to train the immune response, but not enough to make you sick.
If it was like a car, it'd be like you're just showing the car door to the body, right? There's no way that car door can turn into a whole new car. But it's enough of a piece of the car for your immune system to recognize that car if it saw it again.
Scientists started by sequencing the virus's DNA from a sick patient, then encoding that genetic sequence into an mRNA instruction molecule that can be read by the manufacturing part of cells.
From there, it's a bit like Snapchat. The mRNA gets injected into your body, sending instructions to your cells that last for a bit and then get deleted forever. So it's not like your cells are being genetically modified.
They're around as messages for some period of time, and then they go away, and then the cells get back to their normal job of reading their own messages instead of reading the message that you're injecting in the vaccine.
The concept has been around since the 1990s, but there are currently no RNA vaccines on the market for any pathogen. So Dr. Crotty says it's hard to estimate how long-lasting the immunity from them will be. Some existing vaccines protect you for life, like the measles vaccine. Others protect you for decades. The flu vaccine lasts just about 6 months. Dr. Crotty says it depends on how fast the virus mutates and how long the immune cells survive. But even in a worst-case scenario,
those aren't insurmountable problems.
Because the best feature of RNA vaccines is that they can be quickly reprogrammed.